And so here we are, back in the saddle again to get through the final issue in the latest arc for Knuckles the Echidna, with issue 15, the third and final part of the Chaotix storyline that up until this point feels like it's gone out of its way to kind of push the Chaotix to the sidelines, as exemplified by the fact that this issue has Knuckles front and center, taking up most of the front cover, with all the other characters pushed into the mid and background. I mean, I get it is his book, but throughout this arc, Knuckles has had 4, maybe 5 pages of story to himself for a plot that's just continuing subplots from earlier in the story, and only barely continuing them considering that we're not really given new information there. Also, me thinks Knuckles has been trying to eat some of those bees in the background considering how swollen his mouth looks here. Poor guy looks like he's chewing on the world's largest wad of gum. It is nice to see that at least one of the Chaotix gets a decent amount of real estate on the title, though still behind the big red echidna that really pulls your attention. In this case, it's Vector. Mighty is also there, but he's tucked into the background behind Vector. At least we've got Julie Sue up there in the sky, all yee-haw and such. That's encouraging, considering this has basically been a story focused pretty firmly on her since the whole chili dog incident. We open up on, oh, my favorite, a POV shot from an operating table. A trigger warning here for things like blood, scalpels, emergency rooms, or the like. If those bother you, skip here to get past this scene. I'll not be showing this page again during the video. Okay? Okay, showing the page now. Yeah, it's a POV shot from a presumably down-and-out Charmy bee being cut into by said doctors, one of which is particularly talkative and jokey during the whole thing, before saying after they're finished with surgery that he has to go and throw up for a while. That's charming. And also horrifying. And while we don't see anything on the table, you still get a bloody scalpel plain as day in one of the panels, and sure, the blood is more purple than bright red or crimson or anything. That does look more like, grape jelly, which is probably better for kids than the actual red stuff, but still, the implication of what is happening is writhe-inducing. And cut to Julie Sue in the predicament she was in at the end of the last issue, being thrown off the roof of a warehouse. While Ebony and his cohorts walk off before making sure she actually hits the ground. You always check for a body if you can, fools. Julie manages to fire off a grappling hook and swing herself to safety. Safety being a random couple's bedroom. She runs out of the building, meeting up with Remington, and the two of them knock out a guard that was apparently guarding this random apartment building, I think? Where even are we right now? Where's the warehouse that she was in before? Right, well, before my senses of space and time can be thrown too far out of whack, the two of them manage to get back out to Harry's cab and push him to follow after Ebony's car as he calls up the professor, basically the guy who's making the drug, and order him to shut down production so they can lay low for a while. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, the Chaotix reunite while waiting on word for Charmy, who is apparently on the way to a full recovery, but still down and out. Vector states that he's managed to isolate the local police band and has gotten an update on what's going on with Julie Sue and Remington somehow, who we cut back to, who for some reason take out a dingo guard. Not really sure if he was involved or anything. He looked like any other dingo, before breaking into a random building that is apparently another warehouse where the drug manufacturing takes place, where the professor is elated to talk about just how potent and easy to make the latest batch is. Ebony points out that he told him to shut everything down and move it elsewhere so that they could, lay low, which, given the size and scope of the operation, I don't know why he expected that to be done in what had to be only a few hours, saying that he'd rather take a short-term loss to avoid long-term hard time. Cut to Mighty, Espio, and Vector arriving nearby after hitching a ride on a truck. They spot Harry's cab, and after Espio almost gets his head blasted off by the cabbie, they confirm that the warehouse is where Julie and Remington are, and then they charge forward, ready to finally do something in an arc that was supposed to be about them from the start. Back inside, while the professor and Ebony continue arguing over either finishing the current batch or abandoning it, Remington and Julie Sue decide that it's time to make their presence known. without first having a legit plan of taking down all the drug dealers. Sure, Remington does get in a pretty good headshot on Blackjack, but all it gets him is thrown into a big pile of suspiciously light crates. Or maybe they aren't light, considering he seems to get buried under them afterwards. Ebony fires up into the ceiling where he thinks he heard Julie's voice, or maybe his gun is just blowing big yellow bubbles according to the panel here. Yeah, I'm aware it's supposed to suggest that he's waving and firing in an arc, but this way of showing that particular action will never look cool to me. I think it honestly looks ridiculous. Then Julie drops down from above, though rather than attempting to take him down by swinging into him, she swings wide while he complains about the fact that he saw her die. So she shouldn't be here right now, and continues to fire on her. Like I said, you should have checked for a body, man. She lands hard and immediately gets a gun pointed at her head, and I'm guessing that wasn't part of their original plan, if they had a plan at all given how this went, but thankfully, she's saved by the timely arrival of a camouflaged Espio, who knocks the gun away, allowing Julie to land a pretty firm punch on Ebony and send him flying. Espio and Julie run off to find and assist Remington, who's been set upon by Blackjack, who is immediately put down by a firm throw from Mighty, demonstrating his own superior strength. Oh, and Vector grabs Foxy when she tries to make a run for it. Thanks for the contribution, Vector. After that, the cops show up and make quick arrests, with Remington noting that there's one last thing to do, and that's confiscate all the secret sauce that Renfield had at the fairground. For some reason, they aren't booking Renfield despite the fact that he was knowingly selling drugs to people without their knowledge or consent, but no, they're just taking the stuff he has and threatening him with arrest if he keeps making a stink about it. So yeah, apart from, letting a con man get away with partially poisoning his patrons, happy end for all, right? Well, yes, but actually no. We still have the whole thing with Knuckles going on, with Locke and his father speculating that Knuckles' unique and interesting abilities might be due to him being able to channel the Chaos Emerald's powers in unique ways, as demonstrated when Knuckles is able to summon some sort of interdimensional tunnel in his desperation to find his way home, similar to how Dimitri was getting around before, leading to Locke and his dad deciding that it might be best to talk about what they just witnessed with the entirety of the Brotherhood, considering that while Knuckles hasn't shown any malicious intent, his powers have been shown to be similar to Dimitri's. But wait, we're still not done, because now we have a funeral to attend. That's right, you remember Mello, that character that's apparently super important to Charmy's backstory, and was his very best friend that we never got to meet before he wound up dead via drug overdose? It's a fairly somber moment, with Charmy, who I remind you we haven't really seen through the entirety of this issue, making up with his family and delivering some very somber monologuing as he stands over his friend's grave with his and Mello's family. And then he accepts his responsibility as a prince and returns home to be crowned. Well, that was certainly a turnaround. This was another issue that sort of moved at a breakneck pace, but a lot of the big problems with it are ones that sort of plagued the arc as a whole. But we'll get into that in a moment. Let's start with the fact that this issue was all over the place, and I don't just mean in how it jumped from scene to scene, though it did do that quite a bit at the start. But what I mean is, this issue is horrible about giving us a good idea of where the characters are spatially, where they came from, and where they're going. It's really tough for most of this to tell exactly what is happening from panel to panel. The dialogue is just, it's been overbearing before, but it's especially bad here. We're yet again in a situation where I look at what's coming out of each character's mouth and thinking to myself, yeah, this does not sound like something this character would say. Or what any character would say for that matter. I will say that the issue at least does try to have some decent action, with a car chase and a couple of fight scenes, but they're brief and unfortunately involve a lot of that lack of spatial awareness I was talking about before. Oh, and some rather baffling decisions when it comes to our main characters, like Julie blowing their cover and then swinging down right into Ebony's point-blank range, or Remington attempting to take out Blackjack on his own. It's obviously a bad idea. The issue at least gives the Chaotix, minus Charmy, something to do, giving them their big damn heroes moment, though I will say it doesn't feel nearly as satisfying as it should, because they were supposed to be a center point of the arc, and their moment is so quick and brief that it's basically just there to help wrap things up quicker. What was a focal point for this arc for some reason was Charmi's backstory, and what bugs me the most about it is that it just feels so separate from everything else that's taking place during it. Both this and the parts with Knuckles feel like something that should be separated into its own issue, or at least have its own dedicated arc. Yes, the Knuckles stuff is important to things that are going to be taking place down the line, I assume, but it really felt like it interrupted the flow of each issue it was in, with the resolution to it taking place near the end of this issue feeling like something that was paper-clipped onto the story, rather than something that naturally flows from one ending to another. It would have been much better if it had just been relegated to a backup feature rather than being inserted in the middle of each issue. In fact, while it still doesn't flow well in this issue, mostly due to the fact that it's still treated as part of the main story, it still feels like it makes more sense when it's placed at the end here. I can't say the same for Charmi's backstory. The whole thing was weird and felt really out of place, and as I've said, really separated from the main mystery. Sure, Mello's death is what starts it all off, but journeying into Charmi's mind, his memories, his relationships with his family and everything, all of that stuff feels really out of place here. Especially since it isn't really Charmi's story. He spends so much of it conked out in a fever dream that basically exists only to give us, the audience, his backstory. And the way it wraps up tries its best to make it seem like some sort of massive triumph on Charmi's part, of him accepting his responsibility, but considering the fact that we don't see what brings Charmi to this decision and revelation, it feels like a bit of a stretch. It almost feels to me like Charmi's just going back to being a prince because his best friend is dead now, and he was the only thing giving him the courage to actually live his own life. So might as well go back home and accept the responsibility and birthright he was explicitly not interested in before. Also, the full-page panel of Charmi'S Coronation takes place right after the final page of his best friend's funeral, and that is particularly off-putting. This doesn't feel happy at all. I'm sure it's meant to try and be a juxtaposition, like, yay, there is happiness, even in tragedy, but it still feels hollow and forced, especially since I'm pretty sure Mello is never brought up again in the series. I mean, I could be wrong, but in my memory of previous read-throughs, I'm pretty sure he's forgotten about after this, which is really bad character writing when he's a major part of someone else's backstory. So yeah, on the whole, this arc started out with a decent premise that was muddled by trying to do way too much and just sort of petered out at the end. Even after coming back to it after such a long hiatus, I still didn't forget how splintered it felt. And while I like Julie Sue as a character, I'm not that big of a fan of the game character Chaotix getting sidelined in what was supposed to be their own arc. Well, that felt pretty good, shaking the rust off and getting back to the grind. So with that being said, let's see if we can keep that momentum going and see what happens when we jump over to Sonic the Hedgehog issue 60 and catch up with what Sonic and Tails have been up to since the whole Cameo and Mercia thing. See you all next time!